Bonjour à tous.
Good morning still. We're here to rebuild multilateralism. 1 hour to do so. And we're going to do it being faithful to the method applied, announced by Jean-Hervé Lorenzi at the beginning of the Rencontres. That is, 2 days. On Sunday will be the last day of the Rencontres. And we're here to propose solutions. We are not here to establish diagnostic. That was done in all the round tables until now. We're here to propose solutions, concrete solutions to rebuild multilateralism. But this is highly complicated. And why is it complicated? Because in a way, the world never been in such a need for common joint solution for common goods, and it's never been so difficult to produce them. So we need coordination on traditional international coordination topics such as macroeconomic stability, financial stability, food security, the price of raw materials. That was always the role of multilateral institutions, development funding of development. And of course, we have a whole series of new topics that crop up that reinforces the problem and the difficulty, and which in the domain of food safety, energy security, the consequence of the current crisis and the war in Ukraine. In the domain of global value chain, we have to repair the value chain which have been damaged, complicated first by the COVID crisis, then by the Ukraine crisis. And again, I'm not establishing a diagnostic. That was done in the previous sessions. But, well, current multilateral institutions in their current form are not suited to answer such questions. If we take the global chain of value chain, is it who should deal with it? The World Bank or the World Trade Organization? Who should do it? How should it be done? So there are topics which grow rapidly, which are new around technology, regulation of major digital platforms. So this is what I'm doing, by the way, in my job, on my daily job as in the authority to control competition. We need international cooperation, cyber resilience, coordination and exchange between when it comes to personal data protection. So we have bilateral agreements, but not multilateral agreements. And I could give you an endless list. So huge needs and solutions which not only are not here for the new topics, but are more and more difficult for the traditional topics. Why? Because the world is fragmented politically, will be also fragmented economically, even though all the economists do not agree, but at least for the production of goods, which global chain, value chain, which are highly disturbed, maybe not so much for the services. Political fragmentation, there is a fracture in the multilateral system, which is the rivalry between the US and China. I'm sure we will discuss it in our roundtable here. And today, there is war in Ukraine, which creates new fractures, and where the Westerners are, they think they're on the right side. We're on the right side, a good side, but emerging countries, developing countries, do not always agree with you, do not vote with us on our side in the United Nations, and do not want to compromise their relationship with Russia. So we need a view which is not that of the West necessarily. All this is difficult, and I think, as we hear in Aix-en-Provence, and because of the composition of this panel, I think it is essential that we should spend time on the possible contribution to the new world required world order of two regions, that is Europe and the Eurozone, but more specifically Europe and the United Kingdom, which, regardless of what they think, is still part of Europe. Well, at least geographically speaking, and I hope from a viewpoint of value and civilization, and China, which is also represented here. So, to talk all this, we do have a remarkable panel. First, there will be Yannis STOURNARAS, the governor of the Greek Central Bank, who can bear witness of the European construction work, but also the difficulty of this work. And we'll hear Yannis talk about that. We'll hear Ngaire Wang, who presides the Center for China and Globalization, and who is the advisor to the Chinese government on those points. Ngaire Woods, who is the dean of the governance school of Oxford University, online with us, on screen, and thank you for being with us. PANGESTU, who is General Director at the World Bank, and who will share her vision of a multilateral institution that is the World Bank. And especially at a time when G20 is presided by Indonesia, and Mary, who was a minister in Indonesia, will be able to share with us a vision of the role of G20 in this process. So I have the floor to Yannis. Please, less than 10 minutes each in your talk so that we can have a dialogue with the room and with the audience on the internet.
Thank you, Benoît. It is a great pleasure to be with you today. I talk about economic fragmentation mostly, rather than political. And I would start with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has brought the European Union and the Western developed economies as a whole in front of the greatest challenge since the end of the Cold War. So globalization is reversing. The result is a slowdown in the European, the global economy, and rising prices and interest rates. Stagflation winds are blowing everywhere, particularly in Europe, which is a large net energy importer. The world around us has changed a lot. Concerns over supply chain security, energy security, and diversification have become dominant, increasing the need for a regional counterweight. This is the familiar theme of open strategic autonomy. Up to now, reform through crisis undermines Europe's role on the international scene, weakens social cohesion, fueling anti-European sentiment. I'm not sure we can afford, either financially, socially, or politically, to keep relying on the same crisis-reacting propulsion mechanism. A multipolar and partially deglobalized world order is one where Europe needs to act proactively, not retroactively. Despite considerable progress during the great financial crisis, there are several areas of financial integration in Europe where reforms have stalled. The Eurogroup has neither been able to agree on the establishment of a European deposit insurance scheme, nor to reform both banking crisis management and bank resolution processes. The reason that Eurozone member states have not agreed on completing banking union has mainly to do with disagreement on whether risk reduction measures or risk-sharing ones should be taken first. Incidentally, why not taking measures simultaneously, perhaps allowing a specific time horizon? That seems to be a win-win solution. On financial initiatives, the time has come to revise the fiscal framework enshrined in the Stability and Growth Pact. Our aim should be to ensure member states' debt sustainability, to achieve counter-cyclicality of fiscal policy, and to create a central fiscal capacity of all Eurozone member states. Many, including Germany's current Chancellor, have described the Next Generation EU Fund as Europe's Hamiltonian moment. But this is still built as a temporary crisis response. It needs to be transformed into a permanent mechanism combining fiscal centralization with appropriate rules to avoid moral hazard. The Eurozone is a complete monetary union, but it is still an incomplete fiscal, banking, and capital markets union. This, in times of crisis and uncertainty, like the present ones, due to the Russian invasion and the war in Ukraine, produces financial fragmentation and, among others, prohibits the efficient transmission impulses of monetary policy in all euro area jurisdictions. Hence, now is the time to act. We must be proactive, not retroactive. Turning to ancient Greek mythology, we should act as Prometheus did, and not as his brother Epimetheus. But let me first acknowledge the significant progress that has been achieved in the EU economic governance framework since the eruption of the great financial crisis. We have proceeded with the Reform and Stability and Growth Pact between 2011 and 2013 with the objective to enhance fiscal and macroeconomic surveillance and coordination. We have the creation of the Banking Union, SSM in 2014, SRM in 2016 with the objective to mitigate contagion effects. We have the creation of the EFSF in 2010 and its successor, the ESM in 2012, a tool for the prevention and management of sovereign debt crisis. Finally, we had very recently the amendment of the ESM Treaty in 2021 so that the ESM can provide a backstop to the Single Resolution Fund and quell future crises before they escalate. But the momentum seems to have run out of steam before ambitious reforms have been completed, e.g. Banking Union and the European Deposit Insurance Scheme, or reforms are already outdated and need a major overhaul, a Stability and Growth Pact. Well, I will start with very quickly how to improve our economic governance. Many people have provided many ideas. 2 minutes? Okay, so I will go very, very quickly. Greece has an experience since the crisis in 2010, so I will go very, very quickly. I will have a complete text later if you want. We need a new Stability and Growth Pact, which, first of all, makes sure that debt sustainability remains a national responsibility, but there is counter-cyclicality, and there is also a permanent and not a temporary fiscal instrument at the center of Europe, like the NGEU, but with rules which avoid moral hazard. We should make sure that we give incentives to governments to have buffers to stabilize outputs in cases of recession. Second, we need to complete the banking union. Mostly here, we need to establish a European deposit insurance scheme, but also to revise the banking crisis management like the resolution processes. I stop here to give time, but we can discuss things later. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup Yannis. On pourra revenir sur plusieurs de ces questions lors de la discussion.
Henry.
Merci beaucoup, Benoît. Thank you
Merci.
for having this opportunity to speak at this great forum. I think the topic is very interesting, very relevant today. It is building multilateralism. I mean, we are in France, so we are actually having participants around the world for this great forum. And I'm the only person flying from China to attend this forum, so I'm very pleased to be here. Yes. I think that this is really a time to discuss about multilateralism. We know that globalization is now at a crossroad. It's really at a very risky, probably in the history of mankind. It's 77 years plus the Bretton Woods system established. We had the World Bank, we had the IMF, WTO, and all those great institutions. Now it's all really needs to be repaired and needs to be upgraded and enhanced. And but we see the world is actually getting more and more dangerous now. For example, we see there's a lot of military conflict, the war in Ukraine, and also the world is really in chaos, plus the pandemic. But one of the things I think we have to pay attention is that how we can really push the world in the right direction. Are we really having all those more military alliance and secure alliance that are going to help for? For example, we see the NATO expansion. We see also Russian against Ukraine. We see, of course, Five Eyes now wants to get Korea to be part of it, and we see AUKUS being built in the Pacific region, and we see Quad, of course, also a mini NATO probably established in the Pacific, Indo-Pacific region, and also we see IPAF. So all the things actually, I think it's really not helpful. I mean, that's not really the right direction. We should really build on the pillars of the Bretton Woods system that enhance the economy and globalization. So I'm coming from China, but I see that China is really, for the last number of years, concentrated on the economic globalization. For example, China started the Belt and Road Initiative. It's really signed with 20 countries and another 40, 50 international organizations on building the Belt and Road. China has joined RCEP, the largest economic free trade agreement in the world now. And then China is applying to join CPTPP, another free trade upgradation of also in the region. China is applying to join DPA, a digital arrangement. China have signed a great investment treaty with EU, CAI, comprehensive agreement on investment. Of course, that has been put on hold due to the sanctions of each other. But also, China has signed a great agreement with African on this China-African Cooperation Forum, hold it every 2 years. So you see, China is basically expanding and trying to help on the international occasion. So we would like to see more of that. But of course, we see how we can really push forward is the, we are facing the real dangerous world now. We have climate change. China has joined the Paris Accord, and China has actually worked agreement with US on the Paris climate change at the COP26. And of course, also, we know that there's many things we need to have the world work together. Not only, there's security, but let's have more economic, prosperity and focus more on the economic reconstruction. So there's several things that I can propose to work together, between China and other great countries in the world. First, we could do is that in addition to the climate change, we could work together on the infrastructure, because infrastructure is the biggest common denominator of every country. EU has proposed 300 billion on the infrastructure, EU Global Gateway. And US, President Trump has proposed 1.2 trillion on the infrastructure. And also Build Back Better, B3W. So China has this Belt and Road. I mean, why can't we Belt and Road, B3W, and all those things work together, and EU Global Gateway? Let's focus on infrastructure. I was talking to Larry Summers. We had a 1 hour dialogue just about 3 months ago. And he was saying, Henry, maybe we could work, World Bank should replenish and, work more on the infrastructure and green development. I would say that is a really great idea. I love to see that. China has this launched the AIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Asia Infrastructure, AIB actually is joined by UK, EU, almost all the European countries. And it's a global bank. So why not the World Bank, AIB, ADB, AFDB, European Development Bank, let's all work together for the infrastructure needs. Let's even have a new Marshall Plan for the post-Ukraine construction. So this is really something we have to work together. And on top of that, I think we could also work on the, we have a geopolitical very dangerous now. We should work, China, EU, and the US should really work together. So why can't we have a G3 summit? That's a G3 summit. Talk about those global burning issues, dangerous issues. Let's all three parties talk. And, and the EU can mediate the China-US tensions. So there's many things we could do. So this G3 summit, I think it's not only G2, but let's say it's G3. So it's really, really good. And finally, on this Ukraine issue, I wrote a piece at the New York Times on how China can help on that. I think we should really pursue the international mediation. Why not let UN play more role? I mean, P5, permanent 5 member countries, plus EU, plus Ukraine. Let's have a 7-party talks. Let's all sit down, and China could be at the table, and really, we have to find a solution there. Let's have a ceasefire. Let's have a really a more secured, more balanced peace structure for Europe and for Ukraine and Russia. So I think there's many things can be done. But I just want to conclude saying that this is really a great conference that we can really talk about this issue. Multilateralism is really the danger now, but we have regional things going on. So I'm glad to see WTO Minister, MC12 meeting just held last month has reached some really objective. Fishery agreement has been signed, has been achieved after almost 20 years of negotiations. Also, China-US work out on this patent of vaccine waiver for the developing countries. And also plastic emission, anti-plastic emission into the ocean has also been agreed. So there's many things, if we really determine, if we really can sit down and work together, we can really realize, the objective. We have to really work on that. Thank you.
Merci, Henry.
Thank you for your very constructive vision and concrete vision, which is exactly what is needed today. Mary. Bonjour, morning. It is a great pleasure to be here in Aix-en-Provence. Thank you, Benoît. Thank you to the organizers. I will propose 3 hypotheses about or concerning international institutions which have to be challenged if we need to find solutions. For the English speakers, I will switch to English soon, says Madame. First, divisions in the world, rivalry between China and the US and the US have rendered international institutions less useful? No, true. Second hypothesis. The hypothesis that leadership, the internal management of international institutions has no importance on their success. I'll discuss that again. Third, the hypothesis that in a fragmented world, it is better to rely on small coalitions, small groups, coalition groups of volunteers, coalitions of the willings to continue cooperation, and I will demonstrate that this is highly dangerous. No, I switch to English, says Madame.
So the first point I want to make is about the idea that international institutions and cooperation are less useful in a world of the geostrategic rivalry, which I think is profoundly wrong and ahistoric. I want to just make 3 quick points on this. So the first is that the crises the first is we need to refocus international institutions on the issues that absolutely need international cooperation, that no country can take forward progress without cooperation. And that means narrowing the agenda. Food, energy, debt would be the highest on my agenda, because we cannot resolve those problems without international institution. Happily, and here we point towards solutions, the world, even the divided world, is managing to find solutions on these things. Small baby steps. The debt suspension initiative that the G20 remitted to the IMF. The recent trade agreement that was achieved in the WTO last week. These are examples. I think we now need to be more creative. At the very height of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union concluded a treaty on the neutrality of Vienna. That was in 1951. Let's remember that. Perhaps that's a model for how we deal with Taiwan over the next decade to avoid conflict. So my first point is we need international institutions even more at this point. The second is the world and member states pretty much ignore the quality of leadership and performance within international institutions. They fight like crazy to have their own national become the head. And then they pretty much look the other way during the tenure. And very rarely do they collectively assess that performance. And yet history shows us how important the quality of leadership is. There are 3 things we should expect the leader of an international organization to do, that we should measure their performance on. The first is, can they really broker agreement among member states as Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala did last week in the World Trade Organization, but many others failed to do? Second, do they persuade governments to give the organization resources? Look at what Robert McNamara did when he was president of the World Bank as an extraordinary example, quadrupling the resources of the institution. And the third is, do they attract, develop, and retain the best talent in their organization? Or do they simply give up in the face of political pressures from their members? And again, some extraordinary examples. A final example I would throw to you is Dag Hammarskjöld, when he was Secretary General of the United Nations, and invented, using his power as Secretary General, the whole notion of peacekeeping for the United Nations. So it's to say, let's not ignore the leadership of these organizations. They will be a crucial part of these solutions that Benoît asked us to look for. My third point is about coalitions of the willing. In a world where cooperation is difficult, it's very tempting to say, let's just gather together the willing. Look at what the United States and Europe and the United Kingdom did on sanctions against Ukraine. They blasted ahead, hoping others would follow. And in April of this year, they found 82 members of the United Nations refusing to follow. We've got to take that seriously and ask, what is it that those countries are afraid of? Because every single one of them wants to uphold the sovereignty of Ukraine. So what is it that they are afraid of? Quick observation. What they're afraid of is the difference between the G7, the G3 that Henry mentioned, the G20, or a coalition of the willing, setting an agenda or signaling the importance of an issue. That's fine. The G7, the G20 have done that seriously. The differences between that and those small groups of countries actually setting binding rules which they expect all other countries to agree with, even when they have never taken into account the effect on other countries. And here I would give, as a controversial example, the OECD tax agreement, which went ahead with zero research into how that agreement would affect small countries and emerging economies, who now will find their chances to attract investment, according to them, hampered by this agreement. So consultation is vital. I would finish with the words of Robert McNamara in his book, In Retrospect. He was the architect of America's war in Vietnam, disastrous war. One of his main lessons was this: the United States should always consult its allies, not for them, but for itself, because only by consulting other countries do you really test your own understanding of your national interests and how best to pursue them. Thank you.
Merci. Merci, merci.
Thank you very much. And thank you for debunking this idea that coalitions of the willing should replace or be in competition with international organizations. Well, we'll now listen to Mary PANGESTU. She's the only representative of the World Bank and of an international organization today. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Benoît. I hope you can all hear me. I'm here in Bali. I regret not being able to join you in person. I'm here after attending the G20 foreign ministers meeting, where one of the topics indeed that was discussed was the importance of multilateralism in facing this multiple crisis that we are all facing: the COVID-19, the climate, and of course the war in Ukraine and all its implications. And I just wanted to agree with Ngaire that in this kind of situation, international institutions become even more important. Bueno, you asked me a perspective on G20. Whatever you say about G20, we should not necessarily measure the success of G20 with concrete deliverables. In some respects, there have been some concrete deliverables in the past, and in this year of Indonesia, there has been some progress on, say, pandemic preparedness, for instance. But what is more important, I think, with forums such as G20 is to actually, in today's very fragmented world, it's still a forum where you can still engage. The G20 Foreign Affairs Ministers meeting actually had, for the first time, almost all of the G20 ministers, including China, the US, and Russia. You could say that at least they are in the same room. There are opportunities to engage, and there are opportunities to share their views. Whether or not there were results or concrete deliverables is still something that is maybe not yet obvious. But there was a lot of discussion on, for instance, how to unblock the passage for food out of Ukraine, as well as making sure fertilizers and food will continue to come out of Russia and Belarus. No conclusions yet, but as I said, I think engaging is already perhaps something that we could see as positive. And you could say that there was a sense of urgency in this discussion, as well as many other discussions. How do we coordinate internationally to face these really global challenges? I think the current situation, as all of you have mentioned, is really putting a question on the future of multilateralism and globalization. But it also offers an opportunity for all of us to ask fundamental questions on how can we have more collective action, how do we strengthen and build on existing international organizations and mechanisms, and do we need to create new partnerships, new coalitions? I think this is really the fundamental question. Let me just share from a World Bank perspective the response that's been happening since the pandemic. And it's important to recognize that, at least from our perspective, there has been meaningful global cooperation through the COVID-19 pandemic, where we have been able to undertake surge financing to help low-income countries to save lives, livelihoods, and amounting to, since the start of the pandemic, we have committed to and disbursed $270 billion of support. And it's not just financing, obviously, but the how to. What are the priority issues that need to be done in each country, whether it's the vaccination, whether it's the health systems, and whether it's the social protection systems, and so on. And this would not have been possible without the extraordinary replenishment of IDA, which is the International Development Assistance funding we have, which provides grants and concessional funding to the poorest countries to really help public health issues, socio-economic impacts from the pandemic, and so on. And this, I think, is a real demonstration of solidarity by higher income countries, including France. And it's also allowing us to do surge financing for the next 15 months of 170 billion to address the continued needs to save lives and livelihoods, such as the food security issue that has already been mentioned. Out of that 170 billion, 30 billion is going to be allocated to food security. So that's kind of the multilateral response for ensuring that developing countries, especially the poorest, can be supported during these very tough times. But indeed, we need to do more, and it's not just about financing. It's what needs to be done. We see some countries and the international mechanisms that we are seeing now underperform in coordinating the crisis response and in tackling the externalities of global public goods, whether it's pandemic, whether it's food security and financial stability, whether it's climate, or making sure that we have a continued open trading system. So some examples that we see are uncooperative trade policies, like during the COVID-19 pandemic, with advanced purchases and export controls, on medical goods, which really increased the trade costs almost by 60%. So it's these kind of policies lead to unequal distribution of vaccines, as well as leading to several waves of the pandemic taking place because of the uneven distribution and increased costs. And we are seeing a lot of increase in protectionism, nearshoring and friendshoring as a response to the logistic bottlenecks, even though in the past shocks like the Japan earthquake showed that they are not economically efficient as diversifying sources of inputs. And in the trade policy restrictions that we see in the food crisis, this is also really actually accentuating the increase in the food prices. And this is exactly what happened in 2008, where about 50% of the food price increase was due to these restrictions. And we estimate that at the moment, these restrictions are also responsible for the 9% increase out of the 20% increase in the world wheat prices. Weak coordination on the debt issue, weak coordination between Paris Club, non-Paris Club and private creditors has increased the risk of the debt crisis, and countries' slow response to climate change over the past decade has also contributed to climate-related shocks. Why should we be concerned, especially from a developing country perspective? Management of global public goods has become critical to avoid development reversals. Multilateralism has contributed to increased trade, growth, poverty reduction, and better managing global public goods. So without multilateralism, I think developing countries will be the one most hurt. Investment is needed to address the climate change crisis. And this will require an unprecedented level of international cooperation and financing. So I'd like to agree with the point Mr. Wang made it earlier about the importance of increasing investments in sustainable infrastructure as addressing both climate and development. Third, why we should be worried is that crises in a more interconnected world are becoming more global than before. COVID-19 really was the largest simultaneous shock across countries since the 1930s. And the crises are interrelated. You know, COVID is not unrelated to the climate. And the food insecurity is something that existed even before the war. The war accentuated it, but climate is one of the drivers for insecurity and so on. And finally, why should we be worried? We predict that crisis will increase in frequency and shocks will increase in frequency due to climate change. And there could be other shocks, whether it's health, whether it's finance, whether it's economic, or whether it's social. So really, this recurring and frequency of crisis, we really need to strengthen multilateralism and will require greater coordination at the international level. And it starts with existing multilateral organizations. It is really international organizations, strengthening them are needed for us to be successful in achieving multilateralism. Unilateral and bilateral solutions or regional solutions will not be the answer for us to achieve multilateralism. I mean, I can go into detail on this on the trade side, but let me just, because of time, just finish on a few other ideas that we need to do to really use the opportunity of these recurring crises and how to do a better job of responding. The second issue would be establishing rules and procedures at the international level to help countries better account for positive and negative externalities when responding to shocks and making their policy responses more impactful. I think we should learn from the pandemic about how we should be responding in the next pandemic, not just for the prevention and the preparedness, but what do you do with the vaccine distribution and so on and so forth. We need to take measures to help countries internalize externalities of public goods, for instance, in the area of climate change, introduce carbon pricing and develop carbon standards, and really make sure developing countries have the capacity to meet these standards. Better equip MDBs to respond to more frequent crises and the increased importance of global public public goods, including through innovative solutions to further increase financing. And finally, I just wanted to make a point about regional mechanisms. I think coalition of the willing, if it is really a closed bloc, if you like to use that word, and exclusive and not considering other groups or especially developing countries, are not very productive. But regional mechanisms that are building blocks, whether in the trade sense or whether, for instance, some of the regional responses to the pandemic or even regional efforts for energy security, these can be also contributing to multilateralism. So let me stop there and thank you very much for providing the opportunity for me to share some of my thoughts.
Merci, Marie.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you all. Well, we have great luxury, which is that we'll be able to have a debate. Well, I'll ask panelists if they want to add something or comment on what other panelists said. Then I'll have a few questions, and then I'll encourage the audience to ask questions. But maybe first I give you the floor to the panelists. Would you like to add anything or comment or pick up on anything that might have surprised them or shocked them in what others said?
Je vois que tu as envie d'intervenir.
Well, no, I was going to ask Henry. The world needs infrastructure funding. But why do we need international cooperation to get infrastructure funding? I can understand that it would be good to have international cooperation, but I could say, well, infrastructure funding is actually in the basket of things that individual countries or, for example, the European Union could do. And in a world where cooperation is so desperately needed on other issues, should we be doing international cooperation on infrastructure or not?
Thank you, Ledger. I think probably we do, you know, because given the example China has on the AIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, has been very, very successful. We have China as a president, UK is a vice president, the largest recipient is India. And so this is really great, you know, even, and also AIB has stopped its project in Russian and so I think there's a lot of things that we can work together, because I see now the developing countries are really not benefiting from the what China, US, or probably EU are doing all on its separate. So World Bank is really a good example. But World Bank was dealing the problem in the past, much more less complicated and small scale. But I think the world has getting into a you know, stage that where we need the whole, you know, we need to set up a world infrastructure investment bank if World Bank is not performing that. So I think we can strengthen the World Bank, which is a Bretton Woods system product and has been functioning well, and so that we can at least experiment a portion of that development bank alliance for African, for Latin American, for many other countries. Also, let's have international competitive bidding, you know, public procurement, transparency, you know, loans and avoid the debt trap, so that we can really experiment out a public mechanism that is applicable to third countries. So countries like China, US, EU, UK really can work together, because talk about infrastructure, China has now the best experience in the world now because of the infrastructure success they had. So I think it's really needed. In addition to the climate change too, we have to tackle the infrastructure for the green development. We have to do that as well. So I think there's many things we can work together on this global infrastructure common challenge, which I think is really the biggest you know, deficit that probably we're facing now in many, many countries.
Merci, merci Henry. Moi,
Thank you. I wanted to ask our panelists about one word that Mari used and Christine Lagarde also used it. That word, friend shoring. The idea the idea that value chains might be more resilient if we produced in countries that are also allies. For an economist, it is a bit disturbing because how are we to manufacture iPhones if we are to build all the components in allied countries and close geographically? Many countries have become dependent on Russia for energy because Russia was supposed to be an ally, a friend. So actually the energy crisis in Europe, you might argue, is the result of that friendshoring because your allies of yesterday or of today are not necessarily your allies or your friends tomorrow. So what do you think about these concepts?
It's an interesting concept because if you think of it from the European Union or from the United States or from China, it looks like a way of assuring your national security. But I want to look at it from what it means for all the other countries in the world. You know, I'm originally from New Zealand. I know what it's like being from a small country. Because there, it can look more like a new form of empire, right? Where you're required to choose which block you're going to supply, and once you've made that choice, everything follows. And you very quickly find yourself beholden just to the one block. And actually, for most other countries in the world, they want to be able to choose, and they need to be able to choose in order that they get the best deal, even with their most friendly bloc. So that would be my concern.
Yannis?
Yes, well, I'm a strong believer of in free trade. So friendshoring is a necessity if you face constraints, but it's a second best solution. I mean, the first best solution is to have free trade among everybody, among every partner. And in my view, in the case of energy, Europe has no alternative now. If there is an embargo, for instance, on natural gas, but finding alternatives among friends. But the solution is, I said, second best. I mean, the first best is to find a new, let's say, a new platform for negotiating a solution to the problems we face today. I can say that what I've heard from Henry was a pleasant surprise, so I'd like to ask Henry how China can contribute and can alleviate the fears of the West regarding its participation in world trade. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both, Benoît and Yannis. Yeah, no, I think that we are living in the 21st century. It's already we are not living in the Cold War era. So the world is too much intertwined already. So I think this friendshoring, first to answer that, it's really not against the principle of free trade. You know, David Ricardo, this competitive advantage, we should really stick to it because I see China has a lot, 95% of iPhone are made in China. But that can be worked on the 724 basis. So can that be really replicated elsewhere? That's, I mean, big question. Because China has, for example, out of the 7 largest container ports, 7 of them in China. China, anywhere you go, is about 5-6 hours by speed train. Have a 1 billion smartphone user, and China is the largest trading nation with 130 countries. China every year provides 12 million college graduates, abundant talent pool there. So China is really great on the 1 to 100, But US, EU may be good on a 0 to 1. But let's do it. If US and EU good at innovation, might as well continue to do that. And if China is good at production, delivery, and value chain, upstream, downstream, and cohesiveness to do that, and China has no strikes also, by the way, and is very productive, very efficient. So let's maybe, watch on. So if we all can benefit from that. And also this trade war going on, the tariff, has driven up, according to some think tank, 2% of US inflation, because they are putting tariff on goods from China. So last year, when the world is having all this pandemic, China's import-export to the world has gone up almost 30%. Historical high. So I think China is stabilized the economy of the world. China is the really great beneficiary, provider of the world. So I think, if the thing's going well, why should we really disrupt that? I don't really see the reason for that.
Benoît, can I ask you a question?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because a big theme of all of yesterday's Rencontres was for European governments, what do they do in the face of having spent so much money during COVID? And now, do they reduce the state, which we heard French politicians arguing for reducing the state, we heard others arguing for increasing expenditure, and our central banker from Greece has put on the table a counter-cyclical stability and growth pact. So you're a central banker. Do you agree with the governor of Greece? Should there be a counter-cyclical growth and stability pact? And how will we know when politicians are being counter-cyclical and when they're simply buying themselves a new election?
Bon, on aurait sans doute besoin de 2 heures de plus pour parler de ces sujets.
Well, it would probably take hours to answer that. I quite often agree with Yannis, so I'm not going to contradict him today. But I think that the priority for European governments, whatever they be today, is to convert support to demand, to support into support to investment. There's been a lot of support during COVID that was necessary and led to the constitution of huge savings that are not used today. A big chunk of that money was saved by households. So the issue is to now downsize, gradually support mechanisms, because interest rates will no longer make it possible to increase the debt the way it was possible over the last few years, but especially to change this, the configuration of that support, bring support to those who really need it, the most vulnerable households, and convert all that excess in savings into investment so as to meet all the objectives that we've discussed, investment for climate change being one of them. So it's more the composition of that support than its intensity. That's my 30-second answer. Yannis, and then we'll wrap up because I can see a lot of stop signs coming up because we have to vacate the room. So Yannis, last words.
Time in my introduction, you know, in Greece, in the beginning, we took the strictest measures. We had the biggest reduction of the primary deficit in the OECD. We turned it into a primary surplus. But at the end of the programs, the public debt to GDP ratio was higher than the beginning. Why? Because the snowball effect, which is the difference between the growth rate and the interest rate, was negative and countervailed the primary effort. This is what we want to avoid in the new Stability and Growth Pact. It should not be procyclical. And there are ways.
Merci à tous et merci d'avoir proposé des solutions.
Thank you very much, and thank you for actually coming up with solutions, because we really need them today. That's what we need the most. Thank you all.